A single father went on a blind date when she pointed to his necklace and exclaimed, "This is just like my adopted daughter." What happened next left both in tears and changed their lives forever. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The Villa Cafe, located on the bustling Harmony Street in the heart of Brooklyn, buzzed with the typical chatter of a Thursday afternoon. The intense aroma of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the sweet scent of pastries coming out of the oven, creating a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the palpable tension of those waiting for a blind date. The exposed brick walls, adorned with works by local artists, bore witness to countless stories of first meetings, some successful, others not so much. David Johnson, a 42-year-old architect, nervously adjusted the collar of his navy blue dress shirt while observing each woman who entered the establishment. His long, well-groomed fingers unconsciously played with the silver necklace he always wore, a delicate chain with a butterfly-shaped pendant, a piece he had never taken off since becoming a father 15 years ago. His angular face, marked by expression lines that revealed both smiles and worries, reflected the apprehension of someone who hadn't ventured into the dating world for a long time. David was known for his obsessive meticulousness in architectural projects, a trait that extended to all aspects of his life. His brown hair, always perfectly styled, was starting to show a few grey strands at the temples, giving him a distinguished air he was still learning to accept. The 3-day stubble was not neglect, but an aesthetic choice recently approved by his teenage daughter, one of the rare moments of agreement between them in recent months. "You need to get out more, David," insisted Sarah, his partner in the architecture firm and best friend, since their days at Columbia University. "Emma is already 15. She can manage on her own for a few hours. And this music teacher I know is perfect for you. Sensitive, intelligent, and she also has a complicated family history. You two will connect." Across the cafe, near the window overlooking the tree-lined street, Lisa Thompson also showed clear signs of nervousness. A 38-year-old music teacher, she repeatedly adjusted the brown curls that insisted on escaping the low bun she had hastily made before leaving home. Her hands, marked by small scars from guitar and piano strings, trembled slightly as she flipped through a sheet music book she had brought as a distraction, although she knew it would be impossible to concentrate on reading. Lisa wore a midi cotton dress printed with small flowers, a piece she had carefully chosen to convey the delicacy she felt characterized her personality, but also the strength needed to face the daily challenges of running a music school. Her light brown eyes, which usually conveyed serenity during music lessons for underprivileged children, now showed the vulnerability of someone who had learned to protect herself from disappointments over the years. Lisa's history with romantic encounters was marked by mismatches and relationships that ended when partners discovered the intensity of her dedication to social work. Many men felt intimidated by the passion with which she spoke about music and education, considering her too intense or too idealistic for the real world. At 38, she had practically given up on finding someone who understood her priorities. David was the first to stand when Sarah made the introductions. His height of 6 feet became more evident as he approached the table where Lisa was waiting, and she immediately noticed the understated elegance in his movements. He was not the type of man who drew attention through ostentation, but by his serene presence and attentive gaze that seemed to absorb every detail of the environment. "Lisa, I'm David," he said, extending his hand with a shy smile that revealed perfectly aligned teeth. "Sarah told me a lot about your work with children. It's a pleasure to meet you." It was at that moment, when David leaned slightly to greet her, that Lisa saw the necklace. The silver butterfly pendant, delicate and unique, shimmered under the soft cafe light, and she felt as if the world had stopped around her. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and she had to lean on the table to avoid losing her balance. "That necklace," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Where did you get that necklace?" David, noticing the sudden change in Lisa's demeanor, instinctively brought his hand to his neck, protecting the jewelry as if it might disappear. It was an automatic gesture he made whenever someone commented on the pendant, a result of years carrying something so precious and meaningful. It was from my daughter," he replied cautiously, not understanding why that question had provoked such an intense reaction in the woman before him. "She wore it when she arrived at foster care, still a baby. It was the only thing she had from her biological family. I always kept it for her, but Emma never wanted to wear it. She says she prefers more modern things." Lisa felt tears welling up in her light brown eyes, blurring her vision. Long-buried memories began to emerge with painful clarity. A small girl with curly hair, just 2 years younger, wearing an identical necklace while they played in their grandmother's backyard. She remembered the day the social worker came to take her little sister, promising it would only be temporary, that they would soon be together again. "That woman is just like my adopted daughter," she exclaimed, unable to control the emotion that overflowed. "That necklace! I recognize that necklace. It belonged to my younger sister." The cafe around them seemed to fall silent, even though life continued normally. David slowly sat down in the chair across from Lisa, processing the words he had just heard. His dark eyes, usually so controlled and analytical, now showed a mix of confusion and hope that he didn't know how to interpret. "Your sister," he repeated, as if he needed to hear the words again to believe what was happening. "But that would be an impossible coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," Lisa replied, wiping her tears with a tissue she took from her bag. "I've dreamed of that necklace for over 30 years. My little sister was named Emma." The silence that settled between David and Lisa was filled only by the sound of coffee cups being placed on tables around them and the distant murmur of conversations from other patrons in the cafe. David felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the day he received the call from foster care 15 years ago, informing him that a baby urgently needed a family. "Emma," he murmured, as if testing the name on his lips. "My daughter. She always said that name didn't suit her. She prefers to be called Sophie, or even Montenegro, like my last name. I never understood why she resisted her own name so much." Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the long-repressed memories to surface. She could clearly see her little sister's round face, the blonde curls reflecting the afternoon sunlight, the curious little eyes that always followed her around their maternal grandmother's house, where they lived briefly before the final separation. "Did she have blonde hair when she was little?" Lisa asked, her voice still trembling, "and a small birthmark on her right shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon?" David felt a shiver run down his spine. Throughout all those years raising Emma, he had noticed that peculiar mark, but he had never thought much about it. Now, hearing the exact description coming from the mouth of a stranger, or was she really a stranger, he began to believe that something extraordinary was happening. "Yes," he confirmed, almost whispering. "Her hair darkened with age, but she still has golden highlights when she stands in the sun. And the mark, I always joked that it was where an angel had touched her before sending her to me." Lisa smiled through her tears, an expression that mixed joy and melancholy in a touching way. "I used to say the same thing to her when we were little, that angels marked special children, so they could find them easily in heaven." David pulled the chair closer to the table, his dark eyes fixed on Lisa's face, as if trying to memorize every detail, every expression. The orderly architecture of his mind tried to process all the information being presented, but it was like trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces he didn't know existed. "Tell me about her," David asked, his voice revealing a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. "About the Emma you knew. I always wanted to know more about her past, but the records from foster care were very vague. They only said she had been placed by a family that could not care for her." Lisa took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts before beginning to narrate a story she had kept in her heart for decades. The cafe around them seemed to transform into a sacred space where long-hidden truths could finally see the light. "We lived with our maternal grandmother, Mrs. Johnson, in a small house right here in Brooklyn on Aspicuelta Street," she began, her voice gaining strength as the memories became clearer. "Our mother died giving birth to Emma, and our father, well, he disappeared. Even before she was born, Grandma Johnson did what she could, but she was already ill with heart problems." David listened attentively, absorbing every word, as if they were fundamental pieces of a project that was finally starting to make sense. He could imagine a young version of Lisa caring for a baby in a modest home in the neighborhood where they now found themselves. "I was only 5, but I already felt responsible for Emma," Lisa continued, absent-mindedly fiddling with her bag strap. "I sang to her to sleep, helped Grandma with the bottles. Emma was a very calm, baby only cried when she was hungry or tired. She watched me with those big eyes, as if she understood that it was just the two of us against the world." "And how did you get separated?" David asked, fearing the answer, but needing to know the whole truth. Lisa closed her eyes again, and when she opened them, there was a deep pain in her gaze that David recognized. It was the same pain he saw in the mirror during the early years as a single father, when he doubted whether he could give Emma everything she needed. "Mrs. Johnson had a heart attack when Emma was only 8 months old," she explained, her voice breaking. "I remember the day the social workers came. They said it was temporary, that they would soon find a family that could take care of us both. But weeks passed, and I went to a family right here in São Paulo while Emma went to St. Clair Foster Home in the South Side," David completed, finally understanding the origin of the melancholy he had always perceived in his daughter, even in the happiest moments. "Did you try to find her?" he asked, knowing that if he were in Lisa's position, he would have turned Brooklyn upside down, searching for Emma. "I tried for years," Lisa replied, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "But I was a minor. I had no legal rights. My adoptive family, who are wonderful, don't get me wrong, tried to help me, but the records were all messed up. They said Emma had been adopted by a family in another state, that it would be better for everyone if I moved on." David felt a mix of anger and sadness washed over him, as he imagined a small child asking about the sister she had lost, being discouraged from holding on to the hope of a reunion. He himself had gone through difficult moments, trying to explain to Emma why she didn't have a biological family, always wondering if his explanations were enough. "And have you moved on?" he asked, although he already knew the answer from her tone. "Not completely," Lisa admitted. "I became a music teacher partly because our grandmother always sang to us. I opened the music school, thinking that maybe, somehow, music could bring us back together again. Every child I teach could be her. Every new student that arrives could bring news of her." David reached across the table, gently covering Lisa's trembling fingers with his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was laden with mutual understanding. Two adults who had carried the weight of responsibilities and longings that shaped their lives in ways they were just beginning to understand. "She's okay," he said softly. "Emma is fine. She's stubborn, smart, passionate about music, even if she pretends she isn't, and has a huge heart, even when she tries to hide it behind teenage rebellion." Lisa smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face in a way David found extraordinarily beautiful. "She seems to have taken after the family. I was always stubborn too." The weeks that followed their meeting at the local cafe were marked by a delicate dance between David and Lisa, both carefully navigating the uncharted waters of a situation that no relationship manual could have prepared them for. David cancelled 3 important work meetings to meet with Lisa, something his partner Sarah observed with a mix of surprise and approval. "You're different, Dave," Sarah commented as they reviewed the plans for the new residential project on the west side. "Lighter! I haven't seen you like this in a while." David adjusted the glasses he wore for work, avoiding his friend's keen gaze. Since meeting Lisa, he found himself thinking about things he had buried years ago. The possibility of sharing responsibilities, of not being the only adult making decisions about Emma, of maybe, just maybe, building something that resembled a complete family. During this time, David and Lisa met daily, always in places that carried the essence of the city. They walked through the quiet halls of the State Art Museum, where Lisa shared how she used to take groups of children from the music school to ignite their love for art. David watched as she spoke passionately about education, gesturing with her hands as she explained how music and painting could transform lives. "You should see the music school," Lisa said one particularly pleasant afternoon while they enjoyed ice cream at a local farmer's market. The bustling activity around the fruit and spice stalls created an urban symphony that served as the soundtrack to their conversations. "It's nearby on Main Street. It's small, but we managed to serve, almost, 100 children each semester." David bit his lower lip, a nervous tic he developed when needing to address delicate subjects. "Lisa, I need to tell you something about Emma. She's been reacting poorly to the recent changes in our routine." It was true. Emma Johnson had noticed her father's increasing absences and, with the typical insight of a 15-year-old, had begun to ask direct questions that David still didn't know how to answer. "Dad, are you dating?" she had asked the night before while they were having pizza that David had ordered to avoid cooking. Yet another change in the routine that hadn't gone unnoticed by the girl. David had choked on his soda, buying time to formulate a response. Emma was sitting across the table, her long brown hair with golden highlights tied up in a messy bun, wearing the oversized rock band t-shirt she always put on when she wanted to show indifference. But David knew his daughter well enough to see the vulnerability hidden behind her defiant posture. "Why do you ask?" he had replied, still coughing. "Because you're going out every day, coming home smiling like a fool, and yesterday I saw you picking out your shirt for 15 minutes, Emma had shot back, crossing her thin arms over her chest. "Not to mention you're wearing that perfume you only use on special occasions." David sighed, realizing he had underestimated his daughter's observational skills. "I met someone interesting. We're still getting to know each other." "A woman," Emma had stated, not asked. "And you like her?" "Yes," David had admitted, deciding that honesty would be the best approach. "I like her, but that doesn't change anything between us, Emma. You're still my priority." Emma had fallen silent for a few minutes, fiddling with the edge of her pizza slice without eating. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "I don't want another mom, Dad. We tried that before and it didn't work." David clearly remembered the relationship with Rachel 3 years ago, which had ended precisely because Emma couldn't accept the presence of another woman in their lives. At the time, he had chosen his daughter, but the experience had left him cautious about future attempts to build an expanded family. "What would you do?" David asked Lisa as they walked down Main Street toward the music school. "If you were a teenager discovering that your dad is dating someone who might have a connection to your past." Lisa stopped walking, turning to face him with a serious expression. "David, you haven't told her about me yet, have you?" "I wanted to be sure first," he admitted, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. I don't want to raise expectations and then find out I was mistaken, Lisa completed with a sad smile. I understand. But David, every day that passes without her knowing is another day we're building our connection on a fragile foundation. They had arriving in front of the Hope Music School, an old two-story house that had been converted to accommodate music classrooms. The exposed brick facade was adorned with colorful graffiti created by the students themselves, depicting musical instruments and notes that seemed to dance across the walls. A rustic wooden sign announced the schedule for free classes. "Come in," said Lisa, unlocking the iron gate with an old key. "I want you to see what I've built, thinking of her all these years." The interior of the music school was alive with music. The walls were lined with homemade acoustic foam and various instruments, worn violins, an out-of-tune upright piano, recorders, and several violins of different sizes were organized on raw wooden shelves. The scent of old wood mingled with the smell of aged sheet music and the distant echo of scales being practiced upstairs. "It started just with me and 3 kids 8 years ago," Lisa explained, guiding David through the rooms. "Now we have 5 volunteer teachers and a waiting list of nearly 200 children." David observed everything with the technical eye of an architect, but also with the sensitivity of a father who recognized dedicated love when he saw it. Every detail of the space had been designed to welcome children who might not have access to music at home. The chairs were of different sizes to accommodate various ages. The walls featured drawings explaining music theory in a playful way, and there was a small makeshift stage where the children could perform. "Is this where you imagine Emma could have studied?" David asked, gently touching the piano keys. "This is where I hoped she would show up one day," Lisa replied, gazing at a photo on the wall that showed children of various ages holding instruments and smiling. "Every blonde girl who walked in for the first time made my heart race." David was about to respond when he heard a familiar sound, the sound of someone trying to tune a violin awkwardly. It was a sound he knew well, because Emma had borrowed a violin from school a few weeks ago, claiming it was for a music project. "Is someone practicing right now?" he asked, frowning. Lisa checked her wristwatch. "There shouldn't be. On Thursdays, we close at 5, and it's already 5:30. The sound of the violin continued, clearly coming from upstairs. David and Lisa exchanged glances for a moment before silently ascending the wooden stairs, following the hesitant yet determined melody that echoed through the hallway. The rehearsal room door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, David could see a familiar figure hunched over a violin, completely focused on the music. Brown hair with golden highlights fell over the shoulders of a teenager dressed in faded jeans and a black t-shirt, playing a simple yet touching melody. "Emma," David whispered, feeling as if the universe was playing an elaborate trick on them. The hesitant melody of the violin stopped abruptly when Emma Johnson looked up and saw 2 figures in the doorway of the rehearsal room. Her face, which seconds before had shown the serenity of someone lost in music, transformed into a mask of panic and guilt. The violin nearly slipped from her trembling hands as she tried to process her father's unexpected presence in a place where she clearly shouldn't be. "Dad?" Her voice came out as a whisper, laden with surprise and fear. What are you doing here?" David felt the ground shift beneath his feet for the second time in a few weeks. The teenager in front of him, with her 15 years, 5'5" height, and hair that shone under the yellowed light of the room, was his daughter, but she was also something more. She was the answer to decades of searching for a woman standing beside him, watching the scene with a mix of astonishment and recognition that filled her eyes with tears. "Sophie, I should be asking you the same question," David replied, stepping cautiously into the room, as if fearing that any sudden movement could make the situation explode. "You said you were in math tutoring." Emma lowered her gaze, carefully placing the violin on the stand. Her hands, delicate like those of the woman watching her, trembled slightly. She wore the uniform of the private school she attended, a white blouse and a navy blue skirt, but over it she had put on a worn denim jacket that she always wore when she wanted to feel less preppy, as she herself defined it. "I can explain," she began, but stopped when she realized she wasn't prepared to explain anything at all. How could she tell her father that for the past 3 months she had secretly been attending free violin classes at a music school on Main Street, pretending to be involved in school activities? Lisa, who until then had remained silent at the door, stepped forward. Her eyes couldn't look away from Emma's face, absorbing every detail: the small scar on her chin that she didn't remember, the almost imperceptible freckles on her nose, the hazel eyes that were exactly as she remembered, only larger and more expressive. "You play very well," Lisa said softly, her voice heavy with an emotion she tried to control. "How long have you been learning?" Emma looked at the unfamiliar woman with a mix of curiosity and distrust. There was something familiar about her, but the teenager couldn't quite place it. Perhaps it was the way she spoke about music, with the same affection that Emma felt, but never openly admitted. "About 3 months," Emma replied, still cautious. "Are you a teacher here?" "I'm Lisa," she introduced herself, struggling against the impulse to hug the girl. "I run this music school. And you are Emma." "How do you know my name?" Emma asked, glancing quickly between Lisa and David, trying to understand the connection between them. David took a deep breath, realizing that the moment he had been postponing for weeks had arrived. There was no... Emma was more about protecting her from the truth, and maybe she should never have tried. Her daughter deserved to know her own story, no matter how painful it might be. "Emma, take a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair near the piano. "I need to talk to you about some things." Emma reluctantly obeyed, crossing her arms over her chest in a defensive posture that David knew well. It was the same gesture she made as a child when she knew she was about to hear something she wouldn't like. "First, I want you to know that I'm not angry that you're here," David began, sitting in a nearby chair to be at eye level with his daughter. "I'm confused about why you thought you needed to lie, but I'm not angry." "Because I knew you wouldn't approve," Emma quickly replied. "You already pay a fortune for my private school, with tutors and everything. I thought you'd be upset if you knew I was going to a place like this." David felt a pang of pain, realizing how his daughter interpreted his efforts to give her the best possible opportunities. For Emma, the difference between the expensive school she attended and the humble music school wasn't about the quality of education, but about social value. "Emma, this place is wonderful," he said, looking around the room with genuine approval. "And music has always been important to you, even when you pretended it wasn't." Lisa, who had been silently following the conversation, decided to intervene. "Emma, may I ask why you chose the violin?" The teenager looked at her in surprise at the specific question. I can't really explain. I've always wanted to play, but piano seemed too formal, guitar too obvious. The violin, it's like it spoke to me in a way I couldn't ignore." Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, remembering little Emma swaying in her lap while she played a child's violin that their grandmother had bought at a toy store. Even as a baby, Emma would stop crying whenever she heard the sound of the strings. "Emma," David continued, "Lisa and I met a few weeks ago and we discovered something extraordinary." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "She believes that you two have met before, when you were very little." Emma furrowed her brow, looking between the two adults as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. "What do you mean, have met. I would remember if I knew her." "You were less than a year old," Lisa said gently, stepping forward. "I was your older sister." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma stood completely still, processing words that seemed impossible to comprehend. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at David, searching for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke, but found only confirmation in his eyes. "My sister," she finally managed to whisper. "But I don't have family. You always told me." "We didn't know," David replied quickly. "The foster care records didn't mention any relatives. No one knew Lisa existed." Emma abruptly stood up, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. Her light brown eyes were wide, alternating between David and Lisa, as if she were still trying to determine if she was dreaming. "Prove it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "If you really believe this, prove it." Lisa nodded, fully understanding Emma's need for concrete evidence. She opened her bag and pulled out a small yellowed photo, protected by a clear plastic sleeve. With trembling hands, she handed the photo to Emma. In the faded image, 2 children appeared in the yard of a simple house. A girl about 5 years old with curly brown hair, holding a blonde baby wearing a small silver necklace with a butterfly-shaped pendant. Emma looked at the photo for a long moment, then instinctively brought her hand to her own neck, where no necklace was present, but where she knew a crescent-shaped birthmark rested on her right shoulder. "The necklace," she murmured, looking at David. "The necklace you always wear." David took the necklace off his neck, extending it to Emma. For the first time in 15 years, she held it in her own hands, feeling the weight of the warm silver against her skin. "I always knew there was something more," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I always felt like something was missing, but I didn't know what." The days following the revelation at the music school were marked by an almost palpable tension in David's apartment, located on the 12th floor of a modern building in the Upper East Side. Emma had locked herself in her room for 2 consecutive nights, coming out only for meals, where she ate in absolute silence, avoiding any attempts to discuss the issue that had turned their lives upside down. David watched his daughter during Saturday morning coffee, noticing how she mechanically stirred her hot chocolate in the mug without actually drinking. Emma wore the planet-patterned flannel pajamas he had bought the previous year when she still showed interest in astronomy. Her messy hair fell over her face, creating a curtain she used to avoid eye contact. "Emma, you need to talk about this at some point," David said gently, placing a toast with strawberry jam in front of her, her favorite breakfast since she was 8. "Keeping everything inside won't make the situation disappear." "I didn't ask for this situation to exist," Emma replied without looking up, her voice heavy with irritation that barely disguised the vulnerability underneath. 15 years, Dad. 15 years. I thought I had no one in the world but you, and now a woman shows up saying she's my sister, that she's been looking for me for decades, and I should just accept it and be happy?" David sighed, recognizing the logic behind Emma's resistance. He himself had spent sleepless nights trying to process the magnitude in the coincidence that had turned a blind date into something that felt like it was straight out of a dramatic movie. The difference was that he had the emotional maturity of a 42-year-old adult. Emma was only 15 and was dealing with identity issues that could confuse anyone. "You don't have to be happy right now," he said, sitting next to her at the kitchen island. "You can feel confused, angry, scared. All those feelings are valid, but you can also feel curious, hopeful, wanting to get to know someone who was part of your life when you were little." Emma finally looked up, and David could see that her eyes were red, not just from sleep, but from the tears she had been shedding in private. His daughter had always been too proud to cry in front of others, a trait he recognized in himself. "What if she isn't who she says she is?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if she's just a crazy woman who saw an opportunity to get into our lives? What if I start to like her and then find out it was all a lie? The vulnerability in Emma's voice broke David's heart. He remembered when she was 7 and had first asked why her real mum had left her in foster care. At that time, he had explained as best as he could that sometimes people make difficult choices out of love, but he had never managed to completely erase the insecurity that initial rejection had planted in Emma. "Then we'll do DNA tests," David replied pragmatically. "We can go to the lab on Monday. In a week, we'll have scientific certainty." Emma nodded slowly, looking slightly relieved at the prospect of a definitive answer. "And in the meantime, Lisa would really like to get to know you better. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who might have a special connection learning about each other." In fact, Lisa was going through her own emotional roller coaster. David had spoken with her on the phone the night before, listening to her alternate between euphoria and terror at a speed that left him impressed. For 30 years, she had imagined what it would be like to reunite with her lost sister, but she had never considered the possibility that Emma might reject her. "She has every right to hate me," Lisa had said over the phone, her voice choked. "I abandoned her." "You were 5 years old," David had responded firmly. "You didn't abandon anyone. You both were victims of impossible circumstances." Now, sitting next to Emma in the quiet kitchen, David was trying to find words that could build bridges instead of walls. "You know what I find most impressive about this whole story?" he said, changing strategies. "You chose music. Even without knowing you had a sister who is a music teacher, even without knowing your biological family had that connection, you were naturally drawn to the same passion that connects you." Emma considered this for a moment, absent-mindedly fiddling with her toast. "Do you think that means something?" "I think it means that some connections transcend conscious memories," David replied. "Do you remember how you always used to hum when you were little? How you would always stop to listen to music on the street, even when we were in a hurry?" Emma nodded slowly. It was true. Music had always been a part of her life, even when she tried to deny it because she thought it didn't fit the image of the rebellious teenager she wanted to project. "She asked if she could come here today," David said carefully. "Just to talk, to answer any questions you might have, but only if you want." Emma was silent for several minutes, finally finishing her toast as she processed the proposal. David could practically hear the thoughts swirling in her head. She had inherited from him the tendency to analyze all possibilities before making a decision. "Can she bring more pictures?" Emma finally asked. "From when we were little?" David smiled, feeling as if he had just won a small battle. "I'm sure she would love to share those memories with you." "And will you be here the whole time?" she quickly added. "I don't want to be alone with her yet." "Of course. I can stay or I can leave if you want privacy. Whatever you prefer." Emma took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "Okay, she can come. But I'm not going to pretend everything is fine just because we found out we're related. I need time." "No one is asking you to pretend anything," David assured. "Authenticity has always been more important in this house than forced politeness." It was true. Throughout all the years of raising Emma alone, David had prioritized emotional honesty over social conventions. If Emma was angry, she could express her anger. If she was sad, she could cry. If she was confused, she didn't have to pretend to understand. This approach had created a relationship between them based on mutual trust, even during the most difficult moments of adolescence. "Dad," Emma said, hesitating before continuing, "do you like her? As a woman, I mean." David felt his face heat up slightly. It was a question he had asked himself several times in the past few weeks. His circumstances were so unique that it was hard to separate the attraction he felt for Lisa as a person from the fascination with the extraordinary connection she represented with Emma. "I like her a lot," he admitted. "She's smart, passionate about what she does, has a huge heart. But Sophie, our situation is complicated. I'm not going to do anything that could jeopardize the process of you two getting to know each other." Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with the honesty of the answer. "I just don't want you two to be together just because of me. That would be weird." David laughed, surprised by the maturity of the observation. "I promise that any decision about my relationship with Lisa will be based on what we both feel for each other, not on our connections with you." "Okay," Emma repeated, getting up from the island. I need to take a shower and get ready before she arrives." "And Dad?" "Yes? Thank you for not lying to me about this. I know it must have been tempting to come up with a simpler story." David watched Emma go up the stairs toward her room, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. His daughter was growing up, developing the ability to process complex situations with a wisdom that sometimes surprised him. But she was still a teenager, dealing with issues that would challenge any adult. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Lisa. "Emma wants to get to know you better. Can you come this afternoon? Bring the pictures." The reply came in seconds. "I'm on my way. Thank you for making this happen." David looked out the apartment window, watching Brooklyn wake up on a sunny September Saturday. Down below, the streets buzzed with the typical weekend life of New Yorkers. Families walking in parks, young people gathering in cafes, couples enjoying the freedom of days without work commitments. In a few hours, two sisters separated by decades would sit in the same room, trying to rebuild a connection that had been interrupted before it could fully blossom. David had no idea what this meeting would be like, but he knew it would be the beginning of something, whether a beautiful reunion or a definitive farewell. David's apartment had never felt so quiet. As in the minutes leading up to Lisa's arrival, Emma had gotten ready with unusual care, changing her outfit 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a simple white top, a choice David interpreted as an effort to appear neutral, neither too formal nor too casual. She sat on the living room sofa with an English literature book open in her lap, but David could see she was reading the same page repeatedly, absorbing no words. When the doorbell rang, David felt his heart race. He watched Emma close the book with a stiff movement, take a deep breath, and nervously smooth her hair. It was a gesture she had made since she was little when anxious, and it always melted her father's heart. "I'll get it," David said, lightly touching Emma's shoulder as he passed by the sofa. "Breathe, sweetheart. It'll be okay." Lisa stood in the hallway, holding a medium cardboard box and a paper bag typically used in bakeries. She had chosen a discreet floral dress and flat shoes, and David noticed her hands trembling slightly. It was clear she had spent just as much time preparing emotionally as Emma. "I brought some photos and documents I've kept all these years," Lisa said, lifting the box, "and some brownies from the bakery on Main Street. I remembered that when we were little, our grandmother always made sweets when she wanted to celebrate something special." David smiled, touched by the delicacy of the gesture. "Please come in. Emma is in the living room." The first visual encounter between the two sisters, this time with the truth known to both, was charged with an almost electric tension. Emma remained seated, but David could see her fingers contracting over the book's cover. Lisa paused at the entrance of the room, as if fearing that any sudden movement could break a fragile moment. "Hi, Emma," Lisa said softly, her voice laden with a contained emotion that reminded David of how he himself spoke to Emma when she was little and scared. "Hi," Emma replied, her voice coming out lower than she intended. She looked at the box in Lisa's hands. "Are those really our photos?" Many photos, Lisa confirmed, carefully sitting down in the armchair across from the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. Photos, certificates, some things that belonged to our grandmother. I kept everything waiting for the day. You wanted to know your story. David observed the interaction from a nearby chair, ready to intervene if necessary, but determined to let the two find their own rhythm. He could see that Emma was struggling between curiosity and self-protection, while Lisa tried to balance her obvious desire to embrace her sister with respect for the boundaries that Emma clearly needed. Our grandmother, Emma repeated slowly. What was she like? Lisa's face lit up with a fond memory. Mrs. Johnson was tiny, smaller than I am now, but she had a huge presence. She sang all the time, while cooking, while cleaning the house, while giving us baths. She said music kept problems away. Emma relaxed slightly, intrigued despite herself. What kind of music? Samba, bolero, some religious songs, Lisa replied, opening the box and carefully taking out a framed photo. She had an old guitar that leaned against the kitchen wall. Sometimes, when you cried, I would ask her to play, and you would always calm down. She extended the photo to Emma, who took it with cautious hands. In the black and white image, an elderly woman with grey hair held a baby, while a small child pointed to something outside the frame. All three wore genuine smiles, captured in a moment of simple happiness. Do you remember anything? Lisa asked, watching Emma study the photo intently. Emma was silent for several minutes, holding the frame with a concentration that made David lean slightly forward. Finally, she shook her head slowly. I don't remember specific images, but... She hesitated, as if fearing her words would sound silly. Sometimes, when I hear certain songs, especially guitar, I feel like I already know them, like they were part of me before I even knew they existed. Lisa smiled, and David saw tears forming in her eyes. That makes perfect sense. Music was practically your first language. Can I see more photos? Emma asked, returning the frame but keeping her eyes fixed on the box. For the next hour, Lisa carefully pulled item after item from the box, each accompanied by a story. There were photos of Emma as a baby being fed by Lisa with a baby bottle, drawings that Lisa had made at 5 years old, showing two figures holding hands, even a small wooden rattle that had belonged to Emma. I asked to take this with me when we were separated, Lisa explained, handing the rattle to Emma. The social worker said it would be better to make a clean break, but I begged so much that she let me keep one small thing. Emma held the rattle, testing its soft sound. There was something comforting about the weight of the time-polished wood and the metallic sound of the small internal spheres. You carried this for 30 years. I did, Lisa confirmed. It was my proof that you existed, that I hadn't imagined having a little sister whom I loved more than anything in the world. It was at that moment that Emma's defenses began to crumble slightly. David could see the change in her posture. Her shoulders relaxed, she leaned forward with genuine interest, and for the first time since Lisa arrived, a small smile touched the corners of her mouth. Tell me about the day we were separated, Emma asked, surprising both David and Lisa with the direction of the question. Lisa took a deep breath, clearly preparing to revisit one of the most painful memories of her life. Mrs. Johnson had died 3 days before. I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew she wasn't waking up anymore. You cried a lot because I didn't know how to do things the way she did. The baby bottle at the right temperature, the lullaby that calmed you. David watched Emma absorb every word, her expression serious and focused. When the social workers arrived, I clung to you, Lisa continued, her voice growing quieter. I told them I could take care of you, that we didn't need anyone else. But they explained that children can't take care of children, that we needed families who could give us what we deserved. And did you believe them? Emma asked. I was very small. I had no choice but to believe, Lisa replied. They promised it would be temporary, that they would soon find a family that could take us both. I believed that promise for years. Emma fell silent, processing the information. David could see she was trying to understand how she felt about everything she was hearing. There was compassion in her eyes, but also a caution that had not completely faded. Lisa, Emma finally said, why did you never stop looking? Most people would have moved on. The question caught Lisa off guard, and she took a moment to formulate a response. Because you were more than my sister. In the few months we lived together, you became my person. I sang to you, played with you, promised I would always take care of you. Even being small, I took promises seriously. Emma nodded slowly, as if she was finally beginning to comprehend the depth of the love she had lost and found again. And now? What do you hope will happen now? Now I want to know who you have become, Lisa answered honestly. I want to know about your dreams, your frustrations, your passions. I want to be part of your life, if you let me, but in whatever way you feel comfortable. Even if I never feel completely like your little sister again? Emma asked, showing an emotional maturity that impressed David. Even so, Lisa confirmed, you are an incredible person, Emma. With or without shared memories, with or without a common history, I would love the chance to get to know you better. Emma looked at David, who nodded encouragingly, then turned her attention back to Lisa. Can I ask a question about music? Of course. When you teach me how to play the guitar properly, can you teach me the songs our grandmother used to sing? The smile that lit up Lisa's face was so radiant that David felt his own heart warm. It would be an honor, she replied. October arrived in New York, bringing with it the rising humidity that preceded the summer rains and a discovery that would forever change the understanding David and his family had of the past. The DNA test results, which arrived on a sunny morning through David's email, confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. Emma Johnson and Lisa Thompson were, without a doubt, sisters. The scientific confirmation brought a relief that none of the three had realized they needed until they had it. Emma, who had spent the last few weeks oscillating between cautious hope and protective skepticism, finally allowed her defenses to completely disarm. David watched his daughter read the result 3 times before handing it to Lisa with a shy but genuine smile. Now it's official, Emma said, sitting at the kitchen table where the 3 daily meals had become moments of gradual reconnection between the sisters. You are officially stuck with me. Lisa laughed, a light laugh that echoed through the kitchen like music. In the past few weeks, she had become a constant presence in David's apartment, always respecting Emma's boundaries, but creating small, precious traditions, like teaching simple recipes she had learned from Mrs. Johnson, or playing guitar at the end of the afternoons while Emma practiced basic exercises. Is there anyone better I could be stuck with? Lisa replied, gently touching Emma's hand across the table. It was during one of those musical afternoons, when October was already showing signs of transitioning to November, that an unexpected call brought information that would further complicate the already complex story of the Johnson-Thompson sisters. David answered the phone, while Emma and Lisa tuned their instruments in the living room. Mr. Johnson? The voice on the other end was that of an elderly woman, with a heavy accent that revealed a rural origin. My name is Sister Agatha. I work at St. Joseph's Senior Home here on the east side. One of our residents insisted that I call you. David frowned, not understanding the connection. I'm sorry, sister, but I think there's been some mistake. I don't know anyone at this institution. Mrs. Smith saw a photo of your daughter in the local newspaper in an article about the music school on Main Street where she studies music. She insists she knows the girl and has important information about her family. David's heart stopped for a moment. The article in the neighborhood newspaper had been published the previous week, showing Emma playing the violin at a charity performance for the music school. It was a small photo, but clear enough for identification. "Can you give me more details?" David asked, signaling for Emma and Lisa to stop playing. "Mrs. Smith is 84 years old and sometimes gets confused, but she is very clear about some things," Sister Agostina explained. "She said that the girl in the photo is identical to her granddaughter, who was separated from the family many years ago. She insists she needs to tell the truth before she dies." David looked at Emma and Lisa, who were now watching him with curiosity and growing concern. "Sister, can I take them to visit her tomorrow?" "Of course, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Smith will be waiting. But I must warn you that she is very fragile. If this information is important, it might be better not to delay too much." The next morning, David, Emma, and Lisa drove silently through the congested streets leading to the east side, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might discover. St. Joseph's Senior Home was a 3-story building painted light yellow, with well-kept gardens where some residents basked in the sun in their wheelchairs. Mrs. Smith awaited them in a small but cozy visiting room, decorated with plants and photographs of the residents' families. She was a petite woman, with completely white hair tied in a low bun, but her brown eyes maintained a liveliness that belied her advanced age. When Emma entered the room, Mrs. Smith let out a sigh that seemed to carry decades of repressed pain. "My God," she whispered, raising a trembling hand toward Emma, "you look just like your mother at that age, just like my Carmen." Emma carefully sat down in the chair next to Mrs. Smith, while David and Lisa stood, watching the interaction with fascination and apprehension. "Did you know my mother?" Emma asked gently. "Know her?" Mrs. Smith laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Carmen was my daughter, dear. I am your grandmother." The silence that followed was absolute. Lisa leaned against the wall, processing the implication of Mrs. Smith's words. David felt as if he were watching a surreal movie where each revelation was more shocking than the last. "But that's impossible," Lisa finally managed to speak. "Our grandmother was Mrs. Johnson. She died when Emma was 8 months old." Mrs. Smith turned her piercing eyes toward Lisa. "And you must be Lisa. Carmen told me about you before she died. The eldest daughter from her first marriage." "First marriage," David interjected, feeling that he was losing control of the narrative he had constructed about Emma's family. "Carmen was married twice," Mrs. Smith explained, her voice gaining strength as she continued the story. "First to Lisa's father, who died in a car accident when she was 2. Then she married my son, Robert, Emma's father." Emma was completely still, absorbing information that completely reconstructed her understanding of her origins. "So we are half-sisters." "You are sisters on your mother's side," Mrs. Smith confirmed. "Carmen loved you both equally, but when she died giving birth to Emma, the situation became complicated." "Complicated how?" Lisa asked, though something in her expression suggested she already feared the answer. Mrs. Smith took a deep breath before continuing. "Robert, my son, couldn't accept the responsibility of caring for 2 small children alone. He said he would take care of his own daughter, but that Lisa should go to her father's family." "But I went to Mrs. Johnson," Lisa protested, "my mother's mother." For a short time, Mrs. Smith agreed. "Robert convinced Mrs. Johnson to take you temporarily, promising to help financially. but he never sent the promised money. When Mrs. Johnson died, he refused to take responsibility for you." David felt a dull anger rising in his chest. He deliberately separated the sisters. "Worse than that," Mrs. Smith continued, her voice growing weaker but more determined. "When social services came to take Emma, Robert lied about Lisa's existence. He said Carmen had only left one daughter. He wanted Emma to be adopted quickly, without complications." Emma abruptly stood up, walking to the window of the room. David could see she was struggling to process the revelation that she had been separated from her sister not by inevitable tragedy, but by the deliberate choice of someone who should have protected them. "Where is my father now?" she asked, without turning from the window. Mrs. Smith hesitated. "Robert died 5 years ago, dear. Liver cancer. In the last months of his life, he confessed to me what he had done. He said he regretted it, but it was too late to fix it." "And you never tried to find us?" Lisa asked, her voice heavy with a pain that made David want to hug her. "I tried," Mrs. Smith replied, tears now flowing freely down her wrinkled cheeks. "But I was already elderly when Robert died, and the records were all messed up. Besides, I didn't know what name Emma had received in the adoption. Robert never told me the details." Emma finally turned from the window, and David saw that her face was wet with tears. "So we could have grown up together, if it weren't for him?" "You could have," Mrs. Smith confirmed. "Carmen even left a small inheritance, a simple house here on the east side. She wanted you both to share it when you grew up." "Does the house still exist?" David asked. "It does. Robert never managed to sell it. He said he felt haunted there. It has been empty for years, but it still belongs to the family." Mrs. Smith took an old key from her bag beside the chair. "This is the key to your grandmother's house." "Mother, Emma. Now it belongs to both of you." Emma looked at the key as if it were an archaeological artifact, a tangible bridge to a past that had been deliberately hidden from her. "Can I see it?" "Of course, dear, but be prepared. The house has been abandoned for a long time. It will need a lot of work to be livable again." When they left the senior home an hour later, the three walked in silence to the car. The revelation that the separation of Emma and Lucy had been intentional, not circumstantial, changed the entire emotional dynamic of the situation. It was no longer a story of inevitable tragedy, but of cruel choices that had robbed the sisters of 30 years of togetherness. "I want to see the house," Emma said when they finally got into the car. "Today." David looked at Lucy, who nodded silently. "Then let's see the house." The house on Cotumby Street, in the heart of the East Side, was hidden behind a peeling wooden fence and an iron gate that protested with a sharp creak when David pushed it open. The front yard, which had surely once been lovingly tended, was now a miniature jungle where tall weeds mingled with wild rose bushes that had grown untamed for years. Emma and Lucy walked slowly along the irregular stone path leading to the front door, both absorbing every detail of a place that should have been their childhood home. The house was small but solid, built in the typical style of the 1970s, with exposed brick and faded blue wooden windows. David, with his architect's eye, could see that the structure was intact despite years of neglect. The roof would need to be replaced in some areas, the windows needed a fresh coat of paint, and the electrical system was likely outdated, but the bones of the building remained strong. Emma was the first to try the key in the lock. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the rusty metal, and when the door finally yielded with a sigh of moisture-swollen wood, she hesitated on the threshold as if about to enter sacred territory. "Come in," Lucy whispered, gently touching her sister's shoulder. "Let's discover our story together." The interior of the house was infused with the smell of dampness and stagnant time. But there was also something else, a faint aroma of lavender that lingered after all these years, as if the essence of those who had lived there refused to disappear completely. The living room was modest, with furniture covered by white sheets that had yellowed with age. When David pulled one of the fabrics away, it revealed a floral-patterned sofa and a wooden coffee table where a picture frame still rested, turned down. Emma carefully picked up the frame with reverent care and turned it over. The photo showed a young woman with brown hair holding two babies, one clearly older than the other, both dressed in white christening outfits. The resemblance between the woman in the photo and Emma was so striking that David felt a shiver run down his spine. "Our mother," Lucy said softly, looking over Emma's shoulder. "Carmen. I vaguely remember her, but not with this clarity." "She looks happy," Emma observed, delicately tracing the outline of her mother's face through the glass. "She seems like someone who loved being a mother." David watched the two. Sisters share that moment of recognition, feeling simultaneously touched to witness something so intimate and aware that he was an intruder in a family reunion that had been decades in the making. "Shall we see the rest of the house?" he gently suggested. The kitchen bore traces of a life interrupted. Simple dishes still arranged in the drying rack, an open recipe book on a page about cornbread, glass spice jars still organized on the small shelf above the stove. Lucy carefully opened the recipe book, flipping through yellowed pages covered with delicate handwriting. "Chocolate cake for Lucy's birthday." She read aloud, stopping on a specific page. "Add 2 extra tablespoons of sugar because she likes it very sweet." Her voice caught. She remembered how I liked things. There were 2 doors at the end of a narrow hallway, one larger room and one smaller. The larger room still had a double bed covered with a pastel crochet blanket and a dresser where family photographs were arranged like a small altar of memories. Emma studied each photo intently, trying to absorb years of family history in a single visit. "Look at this!" David called their attention to a photo where Carmen appeared pregnant, with a small child, clearly Lucy, resting on her hip. "You were already expecting Emma when this photo was taken." The smaller room broke all 3 of their hearts. It was obviously a nursery prepared with love. A white-painted crib, a mobile with stars and moons still hanging from the ceiling, wallpaper with delicate designs of forest animals. A rocking chair was positioned near the window, where Carmen had surely planned to nurse Emma while watching Lucy play in the garden. "She was preparing for both of us," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wanted us to be a family." Lucy sat in the rocking chair, testing its still smooth motion after so many years. "Sometimes I dream of a woman singing to me in a rocking chair. I always thought it was my imagination creating memories I wished I had." "It probably wasn't just imagination," David said gently. "You must have been almost 2 years old when she died. It's possible you have real memories, even if fragmented." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring every room, discovering small treasures that told the story of a family that had been interrupted before it could fully bloom. There were children's books still organized on a low shelf, toys stored in a wooden box, and even a small violin. Gabriel leaned against the wall of the smallest room. "She wanted you to learn music," David observed, picking up the little violin and testing its loose strings. "That's not a coincidence." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the dusty windows of the abandoned house, Emma made a decision that surprised both David and Lucy. "I want to renovate this house," she announced, her voice firm and determined. "I want it to be a home again." David blinked, processing the declaration. "Emma, that would be a huge project. The house would need a complete overhaul. Electrical, plumbing, painting." "I know," Emma replied, "but Dad, you're an architect. Lucy understands how to create spaces that nurture people through music, and I I need a project that connects me with the mother I never knew and the childhood I should have had. Lucy rose from the rocking chair, walking over to where Emma stood in the middle of the nursery. Emma, that would be wonderful, but... She hesitated. It would be very expensive. I don't have the resources for a big renovation. But I do, Emma replied. Dad has been saving money for my college since I was little, and I can ask to use some of it now for something that is also education. Education about who I am, where I come from. David considered the proposal, weighing both the practical and emotional implications. The idea of restoring Emma's family home had an undeniable romantic appeal, but it also represented a huge commitment of time, energy, and resources. It would be a project of at least 6 months, he said slowly, and you two would really have to be committed to the idea of spending significant time here. It's not something we can start and abandon halfway. I want to do this, Emma said firmly. I want to turn this place into something where our family can truly exist. Our family, Lucy repeated, her eyes filling with tears. You, me, and Dad, Emma clarified, looking between the two adults. If you both want to be a part of it. David felt his heart warm at Emma's natural inclusion of Lucy in her definition of family. In recent weeks, he had watched the connection between the woman he loved and the daughter he adored gradually strengthen, creating something he had never imagined possible. A family that was both being built and rediscovered. Then let's renovate a house, he said, smiling at the two women who had become the center of his world. Let's create a home that honors your past and shelters all of our futures. As they locked up the house and walked back to the car, none of the three spoke much, but there was a different energy among them, a sense of shared purpose that hadn't existed hours before. They had found not just a house, but a project that would unite them in the reconstruction of something that had been lost long ago. On the way back to the Upper East Side, David glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emma and Lucy in the back seat, Emma's head resting on Lucy's shoulder as they both examined the photographs they had found in the house once more. It was an image he would hold in his memory forever. Two sisters, finally on the path to becoming a family again. December arrived in New York City with the typical humid warmth of early summer and a series of challenges that tested the newly formed unity of the Johnson-Thompson family. The renovation of the house in East Side had begun with contagious enthusiasm. Emma researching paint colors on weekends, Lucy planning how to turn one of the rooms into a music studio, David coordinating contractors and overseeing the technical aspects of the restoration. But what initially seemed like a 6-month project soon revealed itself to be more complex and costly than any of them had anticipated. The electrical wiring is worse than we thought, David explained one Saturday morning as they had coffee in the kitchen of their apartment. There was construction dust under his nails and a look of concern he was trying to hide. We're going to need to completely redo it, which means breaking down walls we thought we could leave intact. Emma, who had woken up early to go to the house and help clean up the debris from the previous day, paused with her cereal spoon halfway to her mouth. Does that mean more money? It means quite a bit more money, David admitted reluctantly. And more time. We're talking about maybe 8 months instead of 6. Lucy, who was preparing sandwiches to take to the site, closed her eyes for a moment. In recent weeks, she had watched her emergency fund for the music school dwindle rapidly as she contributed to the renovation costs. The project had become a matter of honor for her, a way to equally contribute to the reconstruction of the family she had lost. But the financial realities were becoming impossible to ignore. Maybe we should reevaluate the scope of the project, she suggested carefully. We can do the renovation in stages, perhaps focusing first on the essential aspects of safety and habitability. Emma lowered her spoon, her expression hardening with the stubbornness that David knew well. No, We're not going to do it halfway. If we're going to restore our mother's house, we're going to do it right." It was at that moment that David's phone rang, displaying Sarah's name on the screen. He answered while watching Emma and Lucy exchange worried glances. "David, I need to talk to you urgently." Sarah's voice sounded tense even through the phone. "That condominium project in Westside that we lost last. A month. The client reconsidered and wants to hire us, but they need a decision today. It's a 2-year project, very lucrative." David felt his stomach tighten. The project in Westside was exactly the type of work that would solve all the financial problems related to the renovation of the house, but it would also require total dedication of time and energy, resources he had promised to his newly reunited family. "Sarah, can I call back in an hour?" he asked, already knowing he would face a difficult decision. When he hung up the phone, Emma and Lucy watched him, with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. David took a deep breath before explaining the situation, observing how hope and concern alternated on the faces of the 2 women he loved. "It's an incredible opportunity professionally," he concluded, "but it would mean I would have much less time to dedicate to the renovation and to us." Emma abruptly got up from the table, walking to the window that overlooked New York, waking up under the December sun. David could see from her tense shoulders that she was processing not only the practical issue, but also what she perceived as a potential repetition of patterns, adults in her life prioritizing work and obligations over family relationships. "You want to accept," she said, without turning from the window. It wasn't a question. "I want to be able to give you everything you deserve," David replied honestly. "And this project would allow me to do that without compromising our financial security." Lucy observed the interaction between father and daughter with the sensitivity of someone who had learned to read complex family dynamics through years of working with children from troubled families. She could see that Emma was struggling between the desire to have David present and the rational understanding that he was trying to be responsible. "Can I give my opinion?" Lucy asked gently. Emma nodded without leaving the window, while David watched her, hoping for guidance from someone whose external perspective could offer clarity they couldn't reach alone. "David, you've spent 15 years being both father and mother to Emma," Lucy began. "Building a career, maintaining a home, making all the important decisions alone. Now you have the opportunity to share some responsibilities, to not carry everything on your shoulders." David frowned, not fully understanding where she was going with this. "What I'm saying is that maybe it's time for you to trust that Emma and I can handle some aspects of the renovation while you work," Lucy continued. "I have experience managing projects at the music school. Emma is 16 and more determined than most adults I know. We can supervise the work during the week, and you can be intensively involved on weekends." Emma finally turned from the window, and David saw that her eyes were red, but her expression was resolute. "Lucy is right, Dad. You've always tried to do everything alone, but you don't have to anymore." "But what if something goes wrong?" David asked, voicing the fear that had kept him awake some nights. "What if I'm not there when you need me?" "Then we handle it together and tell you about it later," Emma replied with a small laugh. "Dad, you taught me to be independent and responsible. It's time to trust that you did a good job." Lucy approached David, placing her hand on the table. "And I'll be there, not as a substitute for you, but as a partner, as family." David looked between the 2 women who had transformed his life in a matter of months, realizing he was facing a pivotal moment not just for their careers and finances, but for defining how they would function as a family unit. He could continue trying to be the sole provider and protector he had been for 15 years, or he could take the leap of faith to truly share responsibilities with people he trusted. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he said slowly. "This project, it's not just in New York. It includes overseeing work in Washington, D.C. and Miami. I would have to travel at least 2 weeks a month." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. David watched Emma process the information, seeing her calculate what 2 weeks of absence a month would mean for their families still getting to know each other better. "For how long?" Emma asked. 2 years. 2 years, Emma repeated slowly. "In my last 2 years of high school." David nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. These were the years when Emma would choose her college, define her future plans, and go through the typical transitions of becoming a young adult. They were also the years when he and Lucy could solidify their relationship, and she could truly establish herself as a permanent part of their lives. "I want you to accept," Emma finally said, surprising both David and Lucy. "Emma?" "No, Dad. Let me finish," she interrupted, returning to the table and sitting down with determination. "I've spent 15 years being your #1 priority. Your whole life revolved around me. Now I have a sister, you have a girlfriend, and we're building something new. But for this to really work, you need to trust that we can take care of you, take care of each other, take care of our family." Lucy smiled, and David saw tears of pride in her eyes. "She's right, David. A real family isn't one person carrying all the weight while the others watch. It's everyone contributing in the way they can." David looked at the two of them, realizing they were offering something he had secretly desired for years, the chance to be part of a team instead of a one-person show. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll accept the project, but with a few conditions. First, you keep me informed of everything that happens with the renovation, even the small details. Second, if either of you needs me for any reason, I drop whatever I'm doing and come home. Third, we have dinner together every Friday night, no matter where I am, even if it's by video call." "I accept all the conditions," Emma said immediately. "Me too," Lucy agreed. "But I have one additional condition." David raised his eyebrows questioningly. "You stop feeling guilty for making decisions that are good for all of us," she said firmly. "You're not abandoning no one. You are trusting in the family we have built together." David nodded, feeling as if a weight he had carried for years was finally being redistributed among shoulders willing to help. "So it's decided. I'll call Sarah and accept the project." As he left the kitchen to make the call, Emma and Lucy exchanged knowing smiles. "I think we just grew as a family," Lucy remarked. "I think so too," Emma agreed. "Now we just need to prove we can manage a renovation without letting the house fall apart." April arrived in New York with the crispness of autumn and the inauguration of the special room at the Hope Music School, a space that David had designed during his work trips and that Emma and Lucy had overseen the construction of over the past few months. The Carmen Room, as they had decided to name it in honor of the mother they both lost too soon, was a place where families who had reunited through music could celebrate their stories. The house on the east side was finally ready as well. What had started as a 6-month project had stretched into nearly a whole year. But the result exceeded all expectations any of them had held that dusty October afternoon. David had used all his architectural expertise to preserve the original essence of the house, while completely modernizing it. The kitchen now had granite countertops and new appliances, but it still held Carmen's recipe book in a place of honor. The old nursery had become a music studio where Emma practiced violin and Lucy composed songs inspired by recovered memories. "Dad, you need to see this," Emma called to David from the porch of the renovated house, where he was adjusting the final details of the outdoor lighting. She held an envelope that had arrived in the mail that morning with the unmistakable seal of the Vienna Music University. David came down from the ladder and joined Emma and Lucy in the living room, which now perfectly combined new furniture with restored pieces that had belonged to Carmen. The golden afternoon light streamed through the freshly painted windows, creating a warm atmosphere that breathed both history and future. "It's the response from the exchange program," Emma continued, her hands trembling slightly as she held the envelope. 3 months earlier, she had applied for an intensive classical music program in Vienna, an opportunity that represented everything she had always dreamed of musically, but it would also mean 6 months away from the family she had just reunited with. "Open it," Lucy gently encouraged, sitting next to Emma on the sofa that had belonged to their mother. "No matter what it says, we'll be here for you." Emma carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the official letter. David watched as their expressions shifted from nervousness to surprise, then to a radiant joy that made his heart swell and tighten simultaneously. "I got accepted," she whispered, then repeated louder with growing euphoria. "I got accepted with a full scholarship." David embraced his daughter, feeling the familiar pride mixed with the anticipated melancholy of separation. Over the past few months, watching Emma mature as she managed the house renovation and developed her relationship with Lucy, he had realized she was ready to soar higher than anything New York could offer. "When do you need to be there?" Lucy asked, though her voice tried to hide the sadness of knowing she had just found her sister only to see her leave again. "September," Emma replied, looking between David and Lucy. "But I'll only go if you both think it's the right thing to do. I don't want to leave you now that we're finally a family." David and Lucy exchanged glances, communicating silently in the way couples learn to do after sharing important decisions. In recent months, they had developed a partnership that functioned both as professional collaboration and romantic relationship, he contributing financial stability and practical perspective, she offering emotional intuition and creativity. "Emma," David said carefully, "being family doesn't mean limiting each other's dreams. It means supporting them, even when it's hard." "Besides," Lucy added with a smile that mixed sadness and pride, "Vienna is where classical music developed. It's where you need to be to become the musician you have the potential to be." Emma looked around the restored room, the photographs of Carmen now lovingly displayed, the small violin they had found on the first day, the plants Lucy had brought to bring life to the spaces. It was the first house she could truly call home, the first place where her complete story was known and celebrated. "But I just found my place in the world," she protested. "How can I leave now?" "Because your place in the world isn't a specific address," David replied, recalling similar conversations he had had with himself during his work trips over the past few months. "Your place in the world is who you are, the people you love, and the talents you choose to develop." Lucy stood up and walked to the upright piano they had restored and tuned, gently playing the first notes of a melody that Emma recognized as one of her sister's original compositions. "You know what I've learned in the past few months," Lucy said as she played. "True love, whether between sisters, romantic partners, or parents and children, isn't about keeping people close to you. It's about helping them become the best version of themselves, even when that means letting them fly." David watched Emma absorb Lucy's words, seeing his daughter process a lesson about mature love that many adults take decades to learn. He remembered when she was little and he held her too tightly during storms, until he learned that sometimes true protection means teaching someone not to fear the rain. "And you'll be here when I come back?" Emma asked, her voice revealing the vulnerability that still existed beneath her confidence. New maturity. "We will be exactly where you let us," David promised. "This house, this family, this love, none of it disappears just because you're going to study on another continent." Actually, Lucy said with a mischievous smile that Emma was learning to recognize as a sign that her sister was planning something special, I was thinking that maybe we could visit you for Christmas, have a family reunion in Vienna. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude instead of sadness. You would do that? Of course we would, David replied. In fact, I have a project in Berlin starting in November. Berlin isn't that far from Vienna. Emma laughed, recognizing her father's characteristic way of turning sentimentality into practical logistics. Then it's decided. I'm going to Vienna, but only if you promise to use this house, to have family dinners here, to keep our story alive, even when I'm not physically present. I promise, Lucy said immediately. I promise, David echoed. That night, the three of them had dinner at the kitchen table that David had personally restored, using dishes that had belonged to Carmen, and talking about future plans that now included international travel, weekly letters, and regular video calls. It was a conversation about temporary separation, but also about the confidence that some bonds are too strong to be broken by distance. When Emma went upstairs to pack, a habit she had developed whenever she needed to process important emotions, David and Lucy were left alone in the living room, watching the afternoon shadows stretch across the windows. "Are you sure we're doing the right thing?" David asked, expressing the doubt that all parents face when they realize their children no longer need them in the same way. "I'm sure we're doing what's necessary," Lucy replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "And sometimes that's the same thing." David looked around the house they had transformed from an abandoned ruin into a vibrant home, realizing that the project had been about much more than architectural renovation. It had been about rebuilding a family, healing old wounds, and creating space for new kinds of love to flourish. "Lucy," he said softly, "I know our situation started in an unusual way, and I know there are times when it must seem too complicated." "David," she interrupted him with a gentle kiss, "some of the best things in life start in unusual ways. Besides, I didn't fall in love with you because of your connection with Emma. I fell in love with you because you're the kind of man who carries his daughter's necklace for 15 years, who rebuilds homes because he knows that home is more important than an address, who lets the person he loves fly because he understands that true love is not about possession." 6 months later, David was at JFK Airport, watching Emma board a flight to Vienna, carrying a new violin that Lucy had bought as a farewell gift and wearing the butterfly-shaped pendant that she had finally decided to claim as her own. Before passing through the boarding gate, she ran back to hug her father and sister one last time. "Thank you," she whispered to both, "for letting me discover who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going." As the plane disappeared into the blue September sky, David and Lucy walked hand in hand back to the car, knowing they would return to a home that was now truly complete. Not because everyone was physically present, but because they all knew they had a place to return to. That night, in the kitchen on Katumbi Street, they received the first letter from Emma in Vienna, describing inspiring teachers, passionate study colleagues, and the view of the Austrian mountains from her dormitory window. But the most important part of the letter was the ending. "I love you. Our family is the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me, and taking it with me makes any place in the world feel a little like home." David carefully folded the letter and placed it in Carmen's recipe book, where they now kept all the important family correspondence. He looked at Lucy, who was preparing tea the way she had learned from Mrs. Johnson, and realized they had achieved something extraordinary. They had transformed an impossible coincidence into a true family, a casual meeting into a story of lasting love, and an abandoned house into a home filled with music and memories. Outside, New York continued to be the giant, impersonal metropolis it had always been. But inside the small house on the east side, two people who had learned that family is something that is consciously built every day were preparing for another night of creating memories that would last forever.